Sirens ripped through the night sky over Herbal, and within minutes, explosions followed. This is not a drill. This is not old footage. This happened overnight, heading into the morning of July 28th, and it puts the entire ceasefire conversation on shaky ground. Reports confirm that U.S. and allied troop positions inside Iraq came under direct attack from Iranian-backed forces, and the location matters more than people realize. Erbil sits in the Kurdish region of Iraq, an area that has stood firmly beside the United States for years. That alliance has made it a repeated target, and this region has now been hit hard for nearly 6 months straight, going back to late February. What makes this attack different is the timing. Right now, the world believes we are in a pause. Negotiations are supposedly happening. Diplomats are supposedly talking. And yet, in the middle of all that talk, drones were launched at American and allied forces. Footage from the ground shows U.S. air defense systems intercepting an Iranian attack drone directly over the city. You can hear the whistle of the interceptor, then the blast, then watch the wreckage fall from the sky in a trail of white smoke. It is a clean intercept, but it is also proof that the attack was real and it was aimed at American assets. The activity did not stop there. Jets scrambled into the air over a nearby area called Ari, and once again, drone interceptions followed. You can hear the roar of fighter engines cutting through the night, mixed with the sound of sirens and ground forces mobilizing below. This was not a single isolated incident. Multiple locations across the Kurdistan region, including Koa, Saran, Kumar, and Khalifan Batas al-Hel reported UAV activity at the same time, all within the same overnight window. That kind of coordinated timing does not happen by accident. It suggests a planned wave of attacks, not a random skirmish. On the ground, air defense crews were working non-stop. Counter-rocket, artillery, and mortar systems known as CRAM were firing into the sky over Herbal, sending streams of tracer fire upward as they intercepted incoming threats. At the same time, U.S. Air Force combat patrols were flying continuous sweeps over the region, specifically to catch these Iranian drones before they could reach their targets. This is a level of activity you do not see during a genuine calm. This is a region actively defending itself against sustained aerial attacks, night after night. Adding another layer to this, a second U.S. Air Force refueling tanker was tracked moving from Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia, heading south toward Yemen. Refueling tankers do not move without a reason. Their job is to support aircraft that are flying long missions or combat patrols. And when you see one heading toward Yemen, it raises real questions about whether Saudi forces are conducting strikes with American logistical support. Nothing has been confirmed publicly, but the movement itself tells a story. It signals that this is not just a Herbal problem. This is a regional problem with multiple fronts potentially heating up at the same time. And then there is the footage from near the Hadith Dam in Iraq's Al-Anbar province, where another drone was shot down. It is still unclear whether that drone belonged to U.S. forces or to Iran, but the fact that it happened at all adds to a growing picture. Across multiple provinces, in a single overnight window, drones were flying, jets were scrambling, and air defense EMS were firing nonstop. This is happening while both sides are supposedly at the table discussing peace. So here is the real question hanging over all of this. If negotiations are supposedly underway, why are American troop positions getting hit this hard, this often, and this consistently? Is this a rogue faction acting outside of Tehran's control, or is this the regime itself testing how far it can push before there are real consequences? Because based on the pattern we are seeing, night after night, region after region, this does not look like an accident. It looks like a message. And in the next section, we need to talk about what happened inside Iran's own borders that same night, because the regime was not just firing outward. It was turning its violence on its own people too. Picture this. A mother stands behind a police line, begging to see her son one last time. An officer looks at her. Instead of showing any mercy, he mocks her. He tells her to cry louder. This is not a scene from a movie. This happened in real life, in the city of Esfahan, while the world was busy watching drone attacks in Iraq. While American troops were dodging incoming fire overnight, the Iranian regime was carrying out something just as disturbing on its own streets against its own citizens. It started with a total communication blackout. Phone lines went dead. Internet access disappeared across Esfahan. When a government cuts off communication like that, it is rarely for a good reason. In this case, the blackout came right before the regime carried out public executions of political prisoners. Reports confirm that 3 people were executed that day. Not 2, as some early reports suggested. Families and neighbors who found out rushed toward the execution site, trying desperately to stop what was happening. They could not save them. Video from the scene shows crowds gathering, people pushing forward, and trying to physically get close enough to intervene. It is hard to watch, and it is even harder to process. These are not soldiers. These are not armed fighters. These are ordinary citizens, standing in the street, trying to protect their neighbors from being killed by their own government. And standing across from them were security forces in full riot gear, carrying rifles, ready to use force against unarmed civilians who simply wanted the killing to stop. To understand why this moment matters so much, you have to look back to earlier this year. Back in January, mass protests broke out across Iran, and the regime responded with brutal force. Roughly 50,000 protesters were killed in the streets during that crackdown. 50,000. That number alone tells you everything about how far this government is willing to go to stay in power. And now, months later, the survivors of that crackdown are being hunted down and executed one by one, often in public, often with families forced to watch. This is the pattern. Protest, crackdown, mass killing, and then a slow, quiet campaign of executions against anyone who survived and anyone who dared to keep speaking out. It is not just happening in the shadows either. These executions are being carried out publicly, almost like a warning to anyone else who might think about standing up against the government. The message is simple and brutal. Resist, and this is what happens to you. But the unrest is not limited to protests and executions. On that same day, a roadside bomb went off in the Sistan and Baluchistan province, specifically targeting a police checkpoint. Smoke rose from the wreckage as security forces scrambled to respond. This region has seen a rise in targeted attacks recently, including drive-by shootings and direct assassinations aimed at regime officials and security personnel. When you put all of this together, a bombing in one province, mass executions in another city, and ongoing military attacks against American troops in Iraq, a clear picture starts to form. This is a regime under pressure from multiple directions at once, and it is responding with violence both outward, against foreign troops, and inward, against its own people. So ask yourself this. If a government has to cut off the internet, execute its own citizens in public, and deploy armed police against grieving mothers just to maintain control, how stable is that government really? Is this the behavior of a confident regime negotiating from a position of strength? Or is this the behavior of a regime that knows it is losing its grip and is lashing out in every direction it can, hoping something sticks? Because right now, while missiles fly over Iraq and drones get shot out of the sky, the Iranian government is also busy fighting a war against its own people. And in the next section, we need to look at what the United States is actually doing about all of this behind closed doors, because the strategy being used against Iran right now is not just about bombs. Forget the missiles for a second, forget the drones, because the most dangerous weapon the United States might be using against Iran right now does not explode, does not make a sound, and never shows up on camera. It is money, or more specifically, the lack of it. And according to insiders close to the Trump administration, this quiet financial squeeze might end up doing more damage to Iran than any bombing campaign ever could. Here is what is actually happening behind the scenes. Senior officials inside the Trump administration believe that sustained economic pressure could hurt Iran more in the long run than expanding airstrikes. That is a big statement, and it comes with real evidence behind it. Intelligence reports are showing growing signs of financial strain inside Iran. Gas shortages are becoming a real problem. The regime is struggling to keep funding flowing to its proxy forces across the region, the same groups that have been launching drones at U.S. troops in Iraq. When the money dries up, those attacks become harder to sustain. A lot of this pressure is coming from the Treasury Department, led by Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. Sanctions are tightening, financial channels are getting cut off, and on top of that, there is a naval blockade in place, one that officials believe could be even more effective than bombing campaigns when it comes to actually choking off Iran's ability to function. Think about it like this. A country can survive missile strikes if it has money and supplies coming in. But if you cut off the money and cut off the supplies at the same time, there's nowhere left to hide. That is the strategy taking shape right now, and it explains why this blockade does not look like it is going away anytime soon. At the same time, Iran is not just sitting back and taking the pressure. Indirect talks are happening, with Iran actively trying to get sanctions relief and access to its own frozen assets. These conversations are not happening face-to-face. They are being run through go-betweens, specifically Oman, Qatar, and Pakistan, 3 countries acting as messengers between Washington and Tehran. This tells you something important. Iran wants relief. Iran wants its money unfrozen. But wanting it and getting it are 2 very different things, especially since the Trump administration is holding firm on one major condition. That condition is Iran's nuclear program. Any agreement, according to officials, must directly address Iran's nuclear ambitions. This is not a side issue that can be ignored in exchange for economic relief. It is being treated as a core requirement, non-negotiable, sitting right at the center of any potential deal. So while Iran is trying to use financial desperation as leverage to get sanctions lifted, the United States is using that same desperation as leverage to force a conversation about nuclear weapons. Both sides are trying to outweigh each other, and right now, time appears to favor Washington. There is one more piece to this puzzle, and it involves why the bombing campaign paused in the first place. Reports indicate that President Trump's decision to pause strikes came after military officials raised concerns about air defense interceptor stockpiles. In simple terms, the U.S. was running through its supply of interceptors, the systems used to shoot down incoming drones and missiles, faster than expected. However, officials are careful to point out that this was treated as a risk assessment, not the main reason for the pause. It was one factor, among several, not the deciding one. So what does all of this actually mean? It means the war with Iran is no longer just about who can strike harder or faster. It has shifted into an economic siege, a slow and calculated squeeze designed to break Iran's ability to fund its military operations, its proxy forces, and its own government functions. Bombs get headlines. Sanctions and blockades do not. But based on what officials are saying, this quiet financial war might be the thing that actually forces Iran to change course. And that raises a bigger question. If the money runs out completely, what happens next? Negotiation or collapse? In the next section, we need to talk about the political side of this, because while the economic squeeze tightens, two of the most important leaders in this entire conflict just met face-to-face in Washington. Two men sat down in Washington this week, and whatever they decided behind closed doors could determine whether this war ends or explodes into something much bigger. Benjamin Netanyahu landed in the United States, and his visit was not just a routine diplomatic stop. He came for two very specific reasons. First, to attend the funeral of Lindsey Graham. Second, and far more important for this conflict, to sit down directly with President Trump and talk about Iran. Reporters wasted no time asking the obvious question. Are the United States and Israel on the same page when it comes to Iran? Trump's answer was short, but it told us a lot. He said they are pretty close enough that there is real alignment between the two countries. But he also admitted there are some small differences. Notice what he did not say. He did not say they disagreed on the big picture. He did not suggest Israel wanted to go further than Washington was willing to go. He said pretty close, which suggests that whatever gap exists between the two leaders is small, not fundamental. Then Trump said something even more important. He explained that Iran took a heavy beating over the last 14 days, and that Iran itself came asking to stop the fighting and start talking. Read that again. According to the president, it was Iran that requested the pause, not the United States backing off, not Israel showing restraint. Iran, after 14 days of sustained pressure, asked to sit down and talk. That detail matters, because it flips the narrative. This is not a ceasefire born out of American hesitation. This is a ceasefire that exists because the other side got hurt badly enough to ask for a timeout. But then came the warning, and it was delivered without any hesitation. Trump said plainly that if no deal gets made, everything goes right back to where it was. Back to strikes, back to bombing campaigns, back to the exact situation Iran was desperately trying to avoid when it asked for the pause in the first place. This is not a vague threat sitting in the background. This is the stated official position from the President of the United States, spoken directly to reporters, with Netanyahu about to walk into the room right after him. So now, let us pull every thread from this entire story together, because on their own, each piece looks serious. Together, they paint a much bigger picture. Overnight, U.S. and Allied troop positions across Iraq came under sustained drone attacks, forcing American air defense systems into repeated action across multiple provinces, all while the world was told a ceasefire was in place. At the very same time, inside Iran, the regime was executing its own citizens in public, cutting off communication in entire cities, and facing bombings and unrest from its own population. Meanwhile, in Washington, officials were quietly running an economic siege, tightening sanctions, enforcing a naval blockade, and using financial pressure as a weapon that never makes headlines but might be doing more damage than any airstrike. And now, the two leaders most responsible for deciding what happens next just sat down together with a direct warning already on the table. Military pressure, civilian uprising, economic strangulation, and now high-level diplomacy happening in real time. All four of these threads are moving at once, and all four of them are connected. This is not four separate stories. This is one story, moving on four different fronts simultaneously. So here's the question I want you to sit with. Iran is under military pressure abroad, facing internal collapse at home, getting squeezed financially by sanctions and a blockade, and now facing a direct ultimatum from the two leaders it fears most. With all of that happening at the exact same time, does Iran actually have enough left in the tank to negotiate a real deal? Or is this regime simply buying time, hoping something changes before it completely runs out of options? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you think we are headed toward an actual peace deal, or do you think we are about to go right back to bombing? Make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss what happens next, because based on everything we just covered, the next update could come very fast.